In today's video we are finally returning to the LEGO airport after way too long of a break, and right off the bat we start off using these chain link fence elements to build a fence for the airport, as airports are usually fully enclosed. However, I immediately severely underestimated how many parts are needed, and unfortunately this is going to be a reoccurring problem I'm going to have over the next minutes, because next up I continued building the vegetation for the front area. I used these bear claws and arranged them along the fence line, creating a flattened effect as if the wind from the turbines have pressed the grass down. This works visually well, but I immediately ran out of pieces again. Improvising, I added a lawnmower at the edge right there, and before we come back to this front area, let's take a look inside the fence. Beyond the fence, outside the airport grounds, there's typically a field or forest, and in this case, I'm using a new tree building technique. Likely unfamiliar for most of you, but over the past months this has sort of become the gold standard for coniferous tree building techniques. Taking a closer look at how one of these trees is built, it starts off using a 2x2 round plate, then I've added these fern pieces on top and now a round jumper plate to connect everything. And now it gets interesting, because as we build a few more of these elements, we can now stack them on top of each other, creating this sort of upside down tree effect, and this is now what this building technique is all about. Everything is built with the stud facing down. So quite an untypical building technique right there. And now in order to make the tree thicker towards the bottom, I'm now using a brick modified with 4 studs. And now on each of these 4 studs towards the sides, I've attached 2 more of these fern pieces, stacked them on top of each other once again. So the fern pieces as well as the studs all face down. And now of course, as we attach the tree trunk right there, we have to turn around the studs once again, because this can't be connected to the rest of the LEGO city, and therefore we add one of these little pins right there. And this then completes our new building technique for the trees and looks absolutely awesome as a completed forest right there. Of course, since the forest isn't too dense in this area, I definitely needed to add some sort of groundwork as well. Therefore, simply few limb elements with stems added inside. Really cheap pieces I used in this case, otherwise the vegetation gets a bit out of hand. You can also see right there that I've left another gap inside the forest. This is for this very suspiciously looking car, because I decided to also incorporate a bit of storytelling in the background of the airport. And all in all, this scene with the car already hints at somewhat shady activities going on. This leads me to the subplot involving the counterfeit money story, because what's going on in this area right there is that the mafia is currently smuggling counterfeit money onto the airfield along other suspicious goods, which of course now means we have to build something these goods can be exported with. And for that, you might remember that quite a while ago we started these little parking spots for smaller airplanes, and this is also exactly what I'm next up going to build. This right here is going to be a small Cessna plane, and honestly this part of building LEGO is my favorite part. Not building trees and hours of repetitive vegetation, but little intricate builds like this one, where you can really spend hours fine-tuning certain details and parts of the airplane. For example, right there, these bars used to connect the main part of the plane with the wings, for example. This is something you quite often find with these small Cessna airplanes, and details like this have to be represented in the model itself, otherwise it just doesn't look realistic at all, and this is what I definitely enjoy most. Then I added this first little Cessna to the parking spot right next to the fence, and I liked the build so much that I decided to add a second plane as well, slowly but surely starting to fill up the, at this point, still a bit too empty airfield. But we'll come back to that later on during the video. In the meantime, it's time to continue on this large empty field, and for that I first of all removed the lawnmower once again, and then decided to add one more little grey cutout built with the exact same building technique I've also used for the rest of the airfield as well, as you can see right there, with the snotted bricks, and also added brick modifieds in order to attach certain parts. And what I'm now building on top of this little area right there is a so-called glide slope antenna used for sending radio signals up to landing airplanes, so they know at which height they are currently flying towards the airport, so they don't miss their landing. Some more vegetation we quickly skip over, because now we have to add more important instruments used for landing. For example, in front right here we now add precision approach path indicators. These are simply lights that, similar to the glide slope antenna, signal the landing airplane on which height it currently is towards the landing. Then, next up, something that you can always find at airfields, and this is not something used directly for air travel right now, but maybe with the first instrument I'm adding right there, you might notice what this is supposed to be. These are just different weather stations used to collect data, not only for air traffic, but also for the meteorologists working there. Next up, I wasn't quite satisfied with the fence at this point, and therefore I started fine-tuning and experimenting with the top of the fence because I wanted to add barbed wire, which is something you can always find surrounding airfields, and therefore I used these chain elements, rolled them up, and then, as you can see right there, it sort of looks like barbed wire. At the beginning, I didn't really like it, but then the more of these elements I added, the better I think it looked. Another thing I also then reworked afterwards is the top of the pine tree, because I added this cone with a bar inserted into it, because now it finally looks as if the trees also have a proper top, which was missing at the beginning. This then leads me to the first short before and after picture of today's video, because next up, after this section, it's time to continue on the other side of the airport with the main airport building. And for that, we start in the beginning with some more tiling. As you can see right there, I'm continuing the exact same pattern I've also used within the rest of the airport building to simply continue this style. Then, in order to continue the building itself, I'm starting off with this cutout right here. This is where now luggage is loaded onto these luggage trucks, which then furthermore load up the airplanes. Therefore, you can see this conveyor belt right there I've added in the corner, where of course luggage comes out of the underground transport system. In front, I've decided to add a little illegal building technique. The look of these bars is achieved by tiles in between studs, which is then connected on top once again in order to be stable enough. As you can see, of course, it is an illegal building technique and therefore not quite as stable as the rest, and then everything is closed off with the visitors platform right on top, which of course has to be connected, but just give me a second for that. The rest of the facade of the airport is built in the exact same style as the main terminal building as well. Therefore, I've also added these large angled glass fronts on top. Via hinges, you can see I've achieved the angle, and then everything is separated off with inverted slopes to represent large concrete beams. This is also, by the way, so everything is stable enough. Next up, it's time to continue in this small room right there, because this is now the main security area where luggage is first of all scanned, and should TSA officers, for example, find something suspicious, they then open up the suitcase, look inside if there's actually any dangerous objects, and then should there be, like in this case, for example, dynamite inside, you as a passenger are ordered back in this security area so they can figure out what is going on. Also, as you can see right there, I've hung up some wanted pictures just to make the wall a bit more interesting. On the other side, so this is now the main entrance of the airport building, we can first of all reach the visitors platform via this curved staircase. I didn't want to spend too much space building that. And then you can see these self-check-in counters I've also added. Since the entire roof structure of the airport is quite large, we also had this problem with the terminal, I've now added quite stable beams and foundations for everything. This part was the smaller first little roof section, and now the second part of the roof is already much bigger, which then also adds tension problems I had, which I already knew would happen. Now, of course, in order to bring everything a bit to life, up on the visitors platform, you also need to have some visitors. And the second part I added, this is now from a, I think, 10-year-old Lego set. I had this small airport sign remaining and thought it looked good at this corner right there. I next up also built a small baggage tow truck. This is of course now for the area underneath the visitors platform, because that's where the baggage is loaded to then be transported to the airplanes, as I've mentioned earlier. And now one more thing I wanted to do is extend the tarmac just a tiny bit in order to gain a bit of space for airport vehicles to actually have a proper parking spot, because that was in fact a problem we had earlier on. The rest of the airport area is now once again fenced off, and on the inside, you guessed it, it's time for a bit more vegetation once again. Although I'm really fed up with vegetation at this point, this is important to gain the necessary space in between the tarmac areas and the landing strip and so on, but also not have the empty studs remaining. On the outside of the fence I started adding a forest, although this at this point is mainly to get an idea of the color concept in this area and get a feeling for the space we have left in between the airport and the train tracks and the farm and so on. On the other side, where we built earlier, I now, since the parts have arrived, was able to finish off the fence, then added the remaining forest in the background. Also, once again, quite important to have a finished sort of frame for the airport, more vegetation. Then I've also added a windsock right next to the weather station, indicating the direction of the wind. I've started adding lead-in lights, although we don't have too much space remaining right in front of the landing strip, which on the other hand is actually quite a good thing because I don't have too much remaining space for more vegetation I need to add. And then, as you can see right there, the entire middle area of the airport at this point is already finished. The only thing that is left for me to build is the connection from the airport to the rest of the Lego city. For that though, I still need to figure out where exactly I want to have roads leading towards the airport and also where the mountain is being placed in the corner right there. So a lot more things to do. For this video, I'd say that's it with the progress. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you again in the next one.